President Biden's Presidential Commission on the Supreme Court of the United States will produce an assessment of possible court reform. The Biden administration established the commission as a response to progressives' concerns over the expedited confirmation of Justice Amy Coney Barrett a year ago. Progressives and legal scholars fear that Republicans' seizure of power over the court may tarnish the court's legitimacy, which in theory is supposed to be apolitical. Concerns have also been raised that the Supreme Court's 3-6 conservative majority may promote Republican rule over the will of the American people, the prospect of which would be a direct threat to America's democracy. Meanwhile, in Michigan, state Republicans have, seemingly strategically, replaced key election panel officials in various counties. They appear to be favoring candidates that have subscribed to Trump's big lie about the 2020 election, and some have voiced racist ideologies via social media. The new candidates are eligible for county and state board canvassers positions, which are heavily involved in counting votes and the certification of election results. Michigan's former state election director acknowledges rather casually that hardcore activists aren't necessarily the best people to be in positions that require, frankly, a little bit of neutrality. You think? Michigan's election panel is the latest example of the Republican Party's attempts to maneuver those upholding their agenda into power over elections, which is yet another threat to our democracy. What we are seeing is an all-out assault on American democracy. Voting rights are under attack. Our courts are under attack. Our civil rights and liberties are under attack. It is not hyperbolic to say that American democracy is on the brink of collapse. Joining me to discuss are philosopher, author, and activist Dr. Cornel West and Associate Professor of History at The Ohio State University, Hasan Kwame Jeffries. Sorry about that, Mr. Jeffries. I'll start with you. How do you assess historically what we are seeing in this particular moment?
Well, Americans have really always sort of suffered from two great myths. One, the myth of American exceptionalism, this idea that America can do no wrong and always proceeds on this path of righteousness, and the myth of perpetual progress, that America always gets better. And the reality is that America has improved over the years, especially in terms of extending its democracy to people who were excluded initially, but it has only done that through hard work and sacrifice of many people, and often people of color and marginalized groups. And certainly America isn't exceptional when it comes to refusing to extend the basic principles of democracy and freedom to other people. And so what we are seeing now is not much different than what we have seen in the past. If we want to maintain this democracy, as flawed as it is, but a democracy nonetheless, then it is going to take work. If we do nothing, that arc of the moral universe will not bend towards justice. It will bend towards the status quo, which has been injustice. And I think that's the moment that we are in right now.
Dr. West, is it hyperbolic to worry that the American system of democracy is on the brink of collapse?
No, not at all. I think that it's the truth, though, brother. But looking at it through the eyes of Black people, American democracy has been on the brink for a long, long, long time. It started on the brink. If we on the plantation and they got a democracy, I mean, Brother Jeffries is right that America's always had a truncated and limited democracy. But now that we've tried to create a multiracial democracy, that it's clear that the conditions for the possibility of sustaining it, in which you deal with the greed, you deal with the wealth inequality, you deal with the vicious white supremacy, you deal with the paranoia, you deal with the polarization, you deal with the gangsterization, and keep in mind that the Black freedom struggle has always been the leaven in the American loaf. And without the Black courage, vision, collective action, the loaf gets stale. And so there's a sense in which the neoliberalism and others taking over, and we just have to be more vigilant.
Professor Jeffries, when you look across the spectrum and all that is happening, on the one hand, Republicans are trying to limit people's access to the ballot, but that's only part of the picture, right? So they're also trying to in some states, empower poll watchers, which is an intimidation tactic. But on the back end is where it gets really, really dangerous, and we don't know exactly how this will pan out. When you start taking over election boards in places where black people have a large percentage of the vote, which is what is been set into motion here in Georgia, or if you do what is happening in Texas, where you empower particular kinds of people to be in positions to call elections, or that is happening across the country, where state by state, we just mentioned in Michigan, put people in power in the counting and certification of the vote who are clear partisans. We don't know how that's going to work out, but it is incredibly dangerous, don't you think?
Oh, it is very dangerous because history tells us that we do know how it's going to work out. That when you put these type of partisans who are determined to make it more difficult for people of color, for African Americans in particular, to vote, that the result will be that fewer African Americans will be able to vote. I mean, the history of voting rights in America is a history of disenfranchising African Americans. And so what we are seeing now is just a reversion to what has historically been the norm. And unless we actually call it out for what it is, because of the 15th Amendment, you can't discriminate explicitly on the basis of race, but it's clear and obvious what the intent is. There is no secret. There is no. I mean, they're saying the quiet part out loud, that the intent is to make it more difficult for people to vote. And that is fundamentally anti-democratic. That is but it is also fundamentally American when we take a long view look at American history.
Dr. West, let's roll it forward a little bit, because I think sometimes people think that, oh, this is just a season in which people are trying to restrict the vote, and rather than thinking of this as an era in which restriction of voting may be taking place. Politico had a story today in which they point out that groups aligned with Donald Trump are hoping that he runs, hoping that he wins, and if he does win, that they would have legislation ready for both state and federal to federalize voter suppression. What do you think about the prospects of, number one, Democrats could in fact lose control of the House and or Senate in 2022, but also that the former president could run again and could actually win, and that could usher in a whole other realm of voter suppression.
Exactly. That's why, when we talk about the big lie of the election, the bigger lie is always white supremacy in the backdrop. And what we're seeing is with Trump and others, that neo-fascism is presenting itself as the only alternative to a society undergoing such profound spiritual decay and moral decrepitude and wealth inequality, with the targeting of Black folk, brown folk, gays, lesbians, poor people as the scapegoats. And we've seen this over and over and over again. And America's been predicated. Remember what Du Bois says in his essay, The Souls of White Folk. A lot of people read The Souls of Black Folk. You got to read The Souls of White Folk. That's in Darkwater. He says America's been predicated on a fear of the truth and belief in the efficacy of lies. And I think that's precisely what Professor Jeffries rightly asked. But the good news is this, and this is very important to mind. The good news is that we Black folk, we folk who care about the truth, no matter what color we are, that we're not going down without a fight. We're going to go down swinging. And that's crucial. I mean, and I do want to congratulate you, my brother. 138 years, Metropolitan Opera finally got a Black opera written by a genius named Terrence Blanchard and written by your powerful Texas sister Lemons. That means we still fighting, man. We still swinging. It don't mean a thing if you ain't got that swing. We still going down fighting. So in that sense, it's on the brink, but it hasn't completely collapsed because we got some folk like the three of us who gonna go down fight.
Professor Jeffries, let me talk about a little bit about that fighting. How do you see this playing out? How do you see the voting rights bill that is going to be, they're going to seek to get a vote on it on Wednesday? How do you see this playing out? Right now, they do not have the 10 senators, Republican senators, to go along with the Democrats on this. That would break the filibuster. It will probably be filibustered on Wednesday. What do you see happening?
Well, as you just rightly pointed out, right now it doesn't look like the Democrats have the votes. They perhaps have the votes right now for the 50 Democrats, but they certainly don't have 10 Republicans on board, which raises the issue that undemocratic, anti-democratic filibuster really needs to go. And we're playing around. Chuck Schumer and others. Hopefully, they're just buying time, and they're not actually playing around. That needs to be on the table. If not completely eliminating it, then certainly getting rid of it when it comes to voting rights. We know that the other side of the aisle will not hesitate to move obstacles out of their way when it comes to advancing their agenda, no matter how undemocratic it is. And so we can't hesitate. That good news that Dr. West was talking about, that we know that Black folk are going to be swinging, but we need some of our elected officials to be swinging as well.
Dr. West, how do you grade the administration's handling of this? Do you think that they are playing this well? That have they weighed in enough? How do you grade them?
When it comes to dealing with voting rights, especially the rights of Black people who voted Biden in, I would give him a D just because I'm Christian and try to love folk and give him the benefit of the doubt. There's no evidence whatsoever that he's putting in a strong fight. And I don't know what Sister Harris is doing. I mean, Black woman vice president and the Black people's rights getting taken away. You think she would be hollering from the mountaintop. And so that in that sense, we need a leadership as good as the people. And this is true no matter what color we are, but it's especially true for Black people. It's especially true for Black folk. And so Biden ought to be ashamed of himself when it comes to not speaking out and pushing against the filibuster and putting the pressure on the two right-wing Democrats who are holding the Democratic Party hostage. So that's the beginning of a critique of low quality leadership among we chocolate folk. And we have to be honest about it. We'll say it in love, but we say it in the name of the people who are suffering. The condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak, and that begins with the poor folk and the working class folk, the least of these, from the 25th chapter of Matthew.
Absolutely. Professor Jeffries, thank you so much for your time. Dr. West, I think we learned from you tonight that when you love someone in spite of their failures, that is a D for Professor West. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it.